Our first author was the 66th United States Secretary of State and the first black woman to hold that office. I am not particularly familiar with her work, but I hear good things. So I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Condoleezza Rice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. And thank you, John, for that stirring introduction. I greatly appreciate it. Well, I am delighted to join you this morning to talk a little bit about the book that I've been engaged in writing since I left Washington. It's very nice now to be out of Washington because I can get up every morning and I can read the newspaper and I don't have to do anything about what's in it. So I've had time to write a book. And in deciding what book to write, I go back to the last days of my time in Washington after 8 years. And as you might imagine, one starts to reflect on the experiences and the opportunities, the challenges, the dilemmas that you faced. And I thought that most certainly I would write a book about the last 8 years in the crucible times since 9/11. And indeed, I will write that book. But as I thought about my own personal implausible journey from Birmingham, Alabama to ultimately Secretary of State, I was a bit preoccupied with a question that everybody always asks me, which is, how did this exactly happen? And indeed, I had a picture on my dresser of a little girl with pigtails who's missing her 2 front teeth, sitting with her father. I'm about 5 years old in that picture, and I did from time to time ask myself, how did that little girl ever become Secretary of State? Well, the answer is you had to know John and Angelina Rice, my parents, in order to answer that question. And so this is a book about them, and it's a book about my life with them and the influence that they have had on who I've become. In short, my parents were extraordinary, ordinary people. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was a Presbyterian minister and later a university administrator, and before that he was a high school guidance counselor. I would doubt that they ever made between them more than $60,000, but there was no opportunity that could even remotely be described as an educational opportunity that I didn't have. That's because my parents were people who believed very much in the transforming power of education. And they believed that education was armor against everything that could happen to you, that it gave you control over your circumstances, or at least over how you responded to circumstances that you couldn't control. Now, they came to these ideas, they were bred to these ideas by parents, their own parents, my grandparents, who also believed in that transforming power of education. My mother and all of her brothers and sisters were college educated, but it really goes back to my grandfather on my father's side, John Wesley Rice Sr., who was a sharecropper's son in Utah. That would be E-U-T-A-W, I'm not kidding, Alabama. And John Wesley Rice, when he was about 19 years old, decided he was going to get book learning. So he asked in the parlance of the day how a colored man could go to college. And they told him about Little Stillman College, about 30 miles from where he lived. And so he saved up his cotton. He went to Stillman. He went through his first year of college. And then he didn't have any more money. And they said, so you'll have to leave. Thinking quickly, he said, so how are those boys going to college? They said, well, you see, they have what's called a scholarship. And if you wanted to be a Presbyterian minister, then you could have a scholarship too. And Granddaddy Rice said, you know, that's exactly what I had in mind. And my family has been college educated and Presbyterian ever since. But that belief in the transforming power of education was passed down to my parents, and they passed it down to me. Now, to be sure, they did it in circumstances that were by no means ordinary, because I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, in the teeth of Jim Crow. I was born in 1954. The Civil Rights Act passed in 1964 when I was 9. In the time in between, I remember my father's stories of trying to go and vote in 1952. He went with my mother, who was asked in the poll test that was then given to black voters. My mother was asked, who's the first president of the United States? She said, George Washington. You pass. Then my father the man pointed to a jar full of beans, and he said, how many beans are in this jar? And of course, my father couldn't answer. And so my dad, really kind of despondent about this circumstance, went back. He talked to an old elder in his church who said, Reverend, I'll tell you how to get educated, how to be able to vote. He said, you go down there, and there's a clerk down there, and she's a Republican. And she's just trying to get anybody to say they'll be a Republican. This was Alabama, after all, in the 1950s. And so he did. He got registered, and that's how my dad became a Republican, and perhaps how the Democrats lost me. So my parents somehow built in Birmingham, Alabama, for me and for their students and their colleagues, a cocoon in which we had ballet lessons and French lessons and all of the opportunities we could possibly have. But of course, they couldn't completely shield us from Birmingham, the most segregated big city in America. Unable to learn to swim because in 1961 Bull Connor closed the pools rather than integrate them. Unable to go into a restaurant or to stay in a hotel until we got to Washington, D.C. But my parents had me absolutely convinced that even if I couldn't have a hamburger at a Woolworth's lunch counter, I could still be President of the United States if I wanted to be. And that was an extraordinary act of parenting. Now, after the Civil Rights Act passed, things changed, of course. We moved to Tuscaloosa, where my dad took up a job at Stillman College, and later on to Denver. But I continued to feel the extraordinary foundation that they had given me. I felt it when a high school guidance counselor at St. Mary's Academy, where I was one of only 3 black women in the class, having gone from a school in which I had no white classmates one year to St. Mary's Academy the next, this guidance counselor, after I'd taken the preliminary SATs and not done very well, said, well, you know, maybe you ought to consider junior college because you're not probably good enough to go to college. But frankly, because of the foundation my parents had given me, I just laughed at her. My parents weren't so amused, and they wanted to go up to the school and to call her out. I decided that they shouldn't, they didn't, everything was fine. Now, to be sure, my parents and I had our ups and downs, the separation anxiety that parents feel as children are growing up, a few boyfriends that my father didn't particularly like, and rough patches when I decided to change my major. I had been a pianist from the age of 3, being taught by my grandmother. I could read music before I could read. And then in having gone off to college to be a piano major, in the summer of my sophomore year in college, I went to the Aspen Music Festival School. And there I met 12-year-olds who could play from sight everything that it took me all year to learn. And I thought, I am not going to play Carnegie Hall. I might play piano bar, I might play Nordstrom, but I'm not playing Carnegie Hall. And so I went back and I had the conversation with my parents that I think so many college students do. Mom and Dad, I'm changing my major. To what are you changing your major, dear? I don't know. You don't know what you want to do with your life. Well, after all, it's my life. Well, after all, it's our money. Find a major. And in fact, I did find a major by wandering into a course in international politics taught by a Soviet specialist named Joseph Korbel, who was Madeleine Albright's father. And at that point, I had found my passion. Well, the rest of the story is the story of my continuing implausible journey through an assistant professorship at Stanford to provost of the university, working for George H.W. Bush in the White House during the crucible years of the end of the Cold War. But at every station, my parents were there for me. My mother, unfortunately, died after a 15-year battle with cancer at 61. My father then died in 2000, just before I left for Washington. We'd come full circle in some way, and that's where the story ends. But you know, there is a story that I think may even be a little bit apocryphal. There's a picture of me standing in front of the White House when I'm 8. And my father always told people, she said, I may be out here today, but I'm going to be working in there one day. Well, actually, I don't remember saying that. But I can imagine John Wesley Rice saying that. I had parents that were extraordinary. In many ways, they were ordinary, but I was very blessed to have them. Thank you very much.
Don't make me like you. That was marvelous. That was wonderful. When's that other book coming out? The other one you were talking about. Want to get a crack at that one. Our next author is very handsome.